Hey guys, this is Josh here, and this is my third time trying to record this thing, so let me try to go ahead and condense it for you because I made it way too long in the other ones. um, we did have some questions come in. I want to go ahead and answer them real quickly. Essentially, the number one question with the VH45 swap is what's the time commitment and how much did it cost? Now, I only spent $1,000 on my 300ZX because I saved it from a backyard. Essentially, it was running. It ran well enough, I guess, but it had very low compression due to an open fuel injector, and so I decided that engine had to go. Total, I probably have between $5,000 and $6,000, including the swap and some suspension components, in my 300ZX project. Now, that's not very much for an actual project itself. It's kind of amazing, but I also kind of got screwed a little bit on my engine. I had purchased my engine for $800 and didn't get any accessories essentially with it. So I started at square one with just an engine, an ECU, a few electronic components, but for the most part, I started out pretty hard. So because of that, let's talk about some of the other things. You can expect to spend less than $1,000 on an engine. Yes, you can find junkyard LSs potentially that might cost less than that, but the VH45 is not usually very stressed in the Q45s. People baby those cars, contrary to popular belief. And as long as the car was taken care of to a certain degree, those motors, because they're so stout, they are a kitchen sink motor. Nissan threw everything they could possibly throw at it, including variable valve timing, and that really helped that engine. So unless the timing guides, which we've talked about in another video, are bad and chewed up and the engine has been starved of oil, you should be good to go even on a very high mileage engine. Similarly speaking, LS motors are similar, but why did I go VH versus LS? The sound. The sound is so unique. When you see one in an engine bay of any car, the VH45 looks very unique, mainly because of the spider intake manifold with equal length intake runners. They come with stainless steel exhaust manifolds, which is awesome. The car in general just makes good power, lots of torque. So yes, you start out with about what stock LS would have for like a smaller LS motor that would be like in an older Corvette or something like that. But the potential is there to make even more power. It just depends on what you want to do. Now, I got a little wordy before when I recorded this about the transmission, and I simply went with my normal NA Z32 transmission. There's almost no difference between a NA transmission and a twin turbo transmission in a 300ZX. So the NAs are going to be found more frequently. They may have higher mileage, but not necessarily be beat on quite as hard because there's not as much power going through them, but they're basically the same. The bell housing is slightly larger on the twin turbo, but it just doesn't matter. It doesn't matter enough to make it something to dwell on. The only thing that you need to know is that the starters do need to be shimmed on the twin turbo because the flywheel is like a little bit larger. So that is something to think about, but I just went NA because it's much easier to find clutches, things of that nature. There are multiple different adapters that you can find, but I use the Performance VH one, which is similar to Mazworks, and all that is it's a partial adapter. So you end up having part of your bell housing ground. The adapter fits in that space, and the actual transmission mounts to that adapter. So that way you don't have to have another plate to push the flywheel out from the engine, like as a spacer, in order to maintain that same distance or whatever with your starter and things of that nature. That's why I don't really care for a Collins adapter, is because then you have to space that flywheel further out so it'll make good contact with your starter. Now, I didn't even use the VH45 little flywheel spacer or whatever that's actually on the flex plate, and my starter engages just fine. I mean, it doesn't have 100% tooth to it, but it's pretty close, and it engages just fine. The car starts great. It doesn't have a lot of tooth wear, so that's good. Does the hood close? There's a lot of talk about this, and no one can give a firm answer other than the people who made their own mounts, and even somebody like Eric at Performance VH. I think that what he's done is very close to fitting with a stock hood, especially if you get his modified coolant pipe setup, which is not a whole lot of money. But I'm going to test this theory that it's close enough to put a hood spacer on in order to have the hood close. So look for a video in the future where I actually install the hood, and we're going to go ahead and test it. We're going to test that theory. But as of right now, there's really hardly anybody that makes engine mounts where the hood fits. Excessive makes engine mounts as well. It's really close, and it's kind of hit or miss on whether people say that they fit or not. But the reality is that intake manifold on the VH45 is freaking huge. There's a huge volume of air that goes into that motor, and because of that huge volume of air and the equal length intake runners and all that, it is not a compact setup at all on the top side. So yeah, that's just something to think about, is you may have to modify your hood, and in selecting a VH45, as far as a swap goes, you do need to be a handy person. It is something that you need to consider, that you need to actually have some sort of mechanical aptitude in order to continue the swap. It's not just something where you can hand off to somebody else and say, hey, you know, just throw some parts at it and get it done. Because the VH45 swap is not like the LS community. It does not have a huge amount of support. I've been working on mine for 3 years. A lot of that is due to decisions that I've made, but it could actually be a much shorter swap. And if you make the right decisions and you get the correct amount of parts, I feel confident enough in saying that you could do the swap in a weekend if you're working very hard. Now that's both days, Saturday and Sunday. If you've got nothing else to do and you kind of know what it is that you're doing, you've planned ahead. But the reality is, even guys that do the Loge swap kit on a weekend, they're not driving around the next week typically. There's always problems to have to deal with. For a drive shaft, I just use a single piece drive shaft by Shaft Masters in the Detroit metro area. They're fantastic. It costs less than $300 to get one, and they have made thousands of 300ZX drive shafts, so they definitely know what it is that they're doing. If you use the Performance VH mounts, you're definitely going to need a single piece drive shaft, because the engine actually gets shoved further back towards the firewall rather than setting further forward. I actually have a rear sump oil pan, and it's completely baffled so that the oil doesn't slosh around, so there's not oil starvation, because I do plan on doing autocross events as well as maybe an occasional track day here and there. However, guys that not necessarily do autocross but do a lot of drifting, they run AccuSump setups. I pretty much think whether you have an LS or whether you have an SR20 under the hood or anything like that, the standard setup in any sort of drifter just about is to run an AccuSump setup, just to make sure that you don't have oil starvation. But I think with Eric's rear sump setup, with the way that pan is designed, it's designed very well with a ton of baffling in it. So it definitely keeps the oil right near the pickup, and it's a very impressive design. So mad props to Eric at Performance VH for that. I would actually recommend, when it comes to wiring, I would recommend getting the wiring specialist harness. Now, the biggest reason is to save time, but also because they have these little heat shrinked labels on each of the wires that sort of say where it is that they're supposed to go. There's a few that do not, and when you're ordering it, you can order it with like an air conditioning option or other different options included inside the harness. They also have a tachometer fix. Because your tachometer with a VH45, because it's a 8-cylinder rather than a 6-cylinder, is not going to read correctly. So some people, like myself, I'm just going to live with it because I don't care. It's not a big deal to me right now to have the tachometer not read correctly because I will be driving by sound anyways, and the engine sounds amazing. But also because it's kind of hilarious to have somebody in the passenger seat, and when you go to rev it up, and it's revving, like it's showing 25% higher or whatever from what it actually is revving. It's kind of funny. So, I know that's awful. I'm sure my wife's going to see this. It's kind of hilarious. But I would go with a wiring specialties harness. Now, there aren't a whole lot of wires that you have to connect, so it is possible to wire it yourself. But if you're not well versed with actually reading wiring schematics and connecting wires together in a fashion that prevents moisture and has a good solid connection, I would recommend that you just buy the harness. The harness is going to cost as much as your motor, potentially. I think I bought my harness for $640 or somewhere right around in there. Like I said, my engine cost $800, so it was almost as much as the engine itself, but it's definitely worth it to be able to just plug it in, check everything. After you get the hoses hooked up, go ahead and turn the key and the car just starts and fires up. Like, it's nice to have, especially on a project car, have something that you can rely on so that when you're troubleshooting later, you're not having to go back to that thing that you just spent all that money on or all that time on to actually troubleshoot and try to fix. So the wiring specialties harness is also a very good quality harness. It actually seems like if you do a lot of motorsports events and you do pop a motor, the harness will last multiple engine swaps. So that's something to think about as well. The biggest reason why did I go VH45 over any other motor, whether it's there's actually guys putting SR20s and 300ZXs now, as crazy as that sounds, but we'll just use an SR20 as an example of an extreme. The amount of time and work that it takes to put an SR20 in a 300ZX, they're still only going to have 240 horsepower, and then by the time that they actually build the SR20 up, it's a whole lot of work for a very strained motor. Now, the stock engine, the VG, does make good power when twin turboed, but I freaking hate timing belts. I don't know about you guys, but I hate timing belts. I hate changing them. I changed the one on mine before I figured out that I had low compression, and boy, was that a huge mistake. But timing belts suck. The VH45 is timing chain driven, and it's reasonably reliable. It stays timed. You don't really have to worry about it. Something like the LS, because the LS is a General Motors product, or in this same goes for, could I put a Coyote motor in a 300ZX? Yes, you could, but the actual getting the interface to work with the rest of the car, because of it not being a similar brand and the connectors not being similar enough, is an issue, and it is going to slow you down dramatically. Like, most of my 3-year journey has been like rebuilding the suspension and cleaning up certain parts of the car and taking my time to really know what it is that I'm doing on the motor. And one of those things was I switched from a conventional side feed injector setup to a top feed injector setup. Now, this is kind of strange because somebody like Ben on Mighty Car Mods, Mechanical Stig, for instance, he used a VH41, an older style, in his Stanza wagon. And he stuck with side feeds because side feeds were easily available and very inexpensive in Australia. However, in the United States, like, the price of side feeds has dropped some, but to be able to get top feed injectors, it's so easy, especially in Metro Detroit where I live at. it's very, very easy to get top feed injectors because of all the muscle cars, and the domestics all use top feeds. And for the most part, everybody has switched to top feeds because they are superior design. The type of injectors that I have are actually LS7 injectors by the company Fast. I bought them from Summit Racing. And I recommend, if you do make a change in your actual setup, something that's going to affect your swap, make the change to get something that is easily available via Summit or another company that services American vehicles. So like what Eric did, for instance, on the coolant pipe setup that I had talked about earlier, is it actually just uses a Chevy 350 thermostat. So changing the thermostat out is not a huge pain in the butt, but the thermostat that you're getting essentially is a Chevy 350 thermostat that could be found at virtually any auto parts store. So if you're at your motorsports event and you need to change it out, you can. But anyways, I think that covers the majority of the questions. The VH45 just sounds amazing. It doesn't sound like any other engine. It can be tuned. There's a lot of people that think that they can't make power with them. You can. You have a ton of torque starting out with. You have as much horsepower and torque as a stock twin turbo has. The difference is that you're not going to have to change a stupid timing belt all the time if you drive the wheels off of your freaking car. And also you have all that torque down low. So off the line at like an autocross event, or even if you, I mean, let's face it, an LS motor is probably going to be the best thing ever for drag racing because you just blow them up like crazy and they're readily available. But to build an LS the same way that you would build a VH45, by the time, I told you how much my swap and car has cost essentially. If I tried to do an LS in the car, it would have cost me $5,000 just to get a junkyard, cheap, not modified LS and get it working, integrated correctly with the car, with a kit. And then on top of that, then I have all sorts of other issues, whether it's fueling, because they require a much higher fuel pressure compared to VH45. But yeah, you can make more horsepower with that sort of stuff. But to me, the unique sound, I really enjoy the whole uncharted territory of a VH45. That's sort of what I'm looking forward to. So if you could, if you have any questions, just go ahead and leave them in the comments below. I also am a member of several VH45 groups on Facebook. I'm sure that you guys can find me on there. But yeah, just go ahead and subscribe. We're going to have more videos like this because we would like to grow the VH45 community. And yeah, hopefully you guys will learn as much as what I have learned. And I'm not necessarily an expert on everything because I do not daily drive my car. It's a project car. It may always be a project car, but the general idea is to make something like what Nissan would make, maybe a little bit more stout for me. So I just did what I saw fit. Now, before I let you guys go, because if you've hung in here this long and you're still interested in a VH45 swap and you're getting ready to comment and also subscribe, definitely write down the pros and cons of every engine that you're interested in, as well as the cost of the components needed that you think you need in order to do the swap, because you're going to find out that a lot of these engines are a lot closer in cost by the time that you pull your motor out and you start putting another motor in, and that ones like an LS are actually going to be more expensive than what you had originally figured. So just take the time to do that and take the time to subscribe. Have a great one, guys.